Greetings, traveler. I'm glad to see you in my tavern. Here you may rest after a hard road, drink a mug of good ale, and listen to an old, honest witcher's tale, one that smells of smoke, winding roads, and silver coins. The wind howled across the Temerian plains, dragging the smell of ash and wet iron through the night. Clouds bruised the sky, hiding the moon, and the fields, once golden with wheat, were now nothing but trampled mud and bones. War had passed through this land not long ago, and though the armies had moved on, their ghosts lingered. Geralt of Rivia rode through this forsaken country at a steady trot. Roach, his trusted mare, moved with the slow patience of one who had seen too many roads, her hooves squelching in the soaked earth. The witcher's white hair was damp, plastered to his face beneath his hood. His eyes, cat-like, pale, and unnaturally still, scanned the horizon as lightning flickered across it. He was not on a contract this time, not yet. He was simply traveling, moving north from Sodden toward the Pontar. He had planned to rest in the town of Ellender before heading to Kaer Morhen for the winter, but fate, as ever, had other plans for him. A shadow moved at the edge of the field. Roach stopped of her own accord, nostrils flaring. Geralt's hand went to the hilt of his steel sword, out of habit, though he knew what he'd seen wasn't a threat, just a shape, stumbling, limping. A man. The figure collapsed a few paces ahead, face first in the mud. Geralt sighed and dismounted. Always something, he muttered, kneeling beside the man. The stench of blood and rot was strong. He turned the man over and saw the cause, deep claw marks across the chest as if torn by a beast. The man's eyes fluttered open for a moment. "The red one," he gasped. "It hunts the grief, the grief." Then his body went slack, dead. Geralt's eyes narrowed. "The red one," he repeated quietly. The wound was fresh, hours old, not days. Whatever had done this was nearby. He took a moment to close the man's eyes before mounting Roach again. The path ahead curved toward a village. He could see a faint glimmer of torchlight through the fog. He clicked his tongue, urging the mare forward. The village was small, barely a cluster of thatched roofs and muddy yards surrounded by a sagging palisade. A single wooden sign read, "Brinna." The smell of smoke and livestock hung thick in the cold air. As Geralt entered, the chatter of crickets died away, replaced by the hollow quiet of suspicion. People were watching from behind shutters. At the inn, a low, crooked building with a faded emblem of a rooster painted on its wall. He dismounted and stepped inside. The common room was dim, lit by a single lantern and the dull orange glow of a hearth. A few men sat at the tables, their eyes darting toward him, then away. The innkeeper, a stocky man with a bald head and nervous hands, greeted him with a thin smile. "Evening, stranger. We don't see many travelers these days. War's scared most folk off." Geralt nodded. "I found a man dead on the road. Looked local. Said something about a red one." The innkeeper's face paled. The chatter in the room died completely. A log cracked in the fire. "Aye," someone muttered from a corner. "The red specter. Comes with the fog. Kills at night. Rips folk apart." Geralt turned. The speaker was an old man with a milky eye and hands that shook as he lifted his mug. "Started a month ago. First, a shepherd went missing, then a widow's son, out fetching water. Found him bled white, like a hog at slaughter. No beast we know does that." The innkeeper quickly crossed himself. "Elder says it's a curse, said the land itself's angry after the battle. said ghosts walk now. Geralt's tone was calm. Ghosts don't leave claw marks. The old man's lips trembled. Then what does, Witcher? What in all the gods' names hunts grief? Geralt didn't answer right away. He looked into the fire, watching the flames twist and dance. I'll find out, he said at last. But I'll need to speak to your elder. The innkeeper hesitated. Elder Bram? He'll be in the longhouse, but you'd best be careful what you promise. Folk here. They've buried too many already. Geralt paid for a mug of ale, but barely drank it. The warmth of the hearth didn't reach him. He could feel something in the air, an old, heavy sorrow clinging to the place. Whatever haunted Brinna, it was more than a simple beast. When he stepped back outside, the fog had thickened. The moon glimmered faintly through it, pale and red as if stained with blood. Roach shifted uneasily, ears flicking. Somewhere in the distance, a woman screamed. Geralt's hand went to his sword. His voice was low, steady. Stay, Roach. Then he ran toward the sound. The scream came from near the edge of the village, where the cottages thinned and the fields began. Geralt moved swiftly through the mist, drawing his silver blade. The grass was slick beneath his boots, glinting faintly. He found the woman kneeling in the dirt beside a broken fence, her hands pressed to her mouth. At her feet lay a man, his throat torn open. His blood had soaked into the soil, turning it black. Geralt crouched, examining the wound. Claw marks again, but deeper this time. 3 long, curved gashes. The body was pale, drained almost completely of blood. He looked up. There, at the edge of the fog, a figure stood. Tall, red-eyed, its skin pale as wax, its mouth wet with fresh blood. It met Geralt's gaze for a heartbeat, then vanished into the mist. The Witcher rose slowly, sword still drawn, his voice cold and calm. So that's you, he murmured. Let's see what you really are. And beneath the whispering fog of Brinna, the hunt began. Dawn came reluctantly to Brinna, dragging its pale light across a land soaked in fear. The mist still clung to the fields, gray and heavy, though the blood from the night's horror had already begun to darken into the soil. Geralt stood near the edge of the village, crouched beside the slain man's body. His gloves were damp with dew and gore as he examined the wounds once more. The villagers had gathered at a distance, whispering among themselves. No one dared come closer. Only the elder, Bram, a broad-shouldered man with a beard like old straw, approached with a kind of weary courage found only in those who have buried too many. 3 deaths this week, Bram said, his voice thick, and before that 2 more. Always the same torn open blood gone. We've buried what we could find. Some, there wasn't enough left to bury. Geralt nodded, still studying the corpse. No sign of a struggle. He didn't even draw a weapon. Aye, they say it strikes so fast the poor devils don't know they're dead till they've fallen. The elder spat into the mud. You think it's a wraith, Witcher? Geralt's eyes lifted. No. Wraiths leave burn marks, not claw wounds. This was something with flesh and hunger. Bram swallowed hard. Then it feeds? Yes. Geralt rose, his expression unreadable. Tell me where the first body was found. Bram led him through the village, past the crooked fences and half-collapsed barns. Brinna was dying, and not just from the killings. War had stripped it bare. The young were gone, either to fight or to flee. What remained were the old, the weary, and those too stubborn or too broken to leave. They stopped at the edge of the woods. A small shrine stood there, its wooden idol of Melitele cracked and blackened by fire. It started here, Bram said, A shepherd found the body in the trees, the widow Marna's boy, tore him apart. Poor lass lost her mind for a time. Geralt's head turned slightly. Marna? Aye. Lives alone on the east side. Her husband fell when the Nilfgaardians came through. She buried him herself. Geralt's gaze swept the dark tangle of trees. And when did the killings begin? Bram hesitated. A few days after she took in a stranger. Said he was a soldier, a deserter. Nilfgaardian by the look of him. Black hair, scar over his eye. Didn't last long, though. The red specter got him too. Geralt said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Later that morning he went to Marna's cottage. It stood apart from the rest of the village, small and leaning, half hidden beneath the skeletal branches of an elm. The shutters were closed, though smoke curled weakly from the chimney. He knocked once, no answer. Again, louder. At last the door creaked open. A woman stood there, tall, thin, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed too large for her pale face. Her hair was the color of ash. Yes, she said quietly. I'm a witcher, Geralt said. Hear about the killings. Her eyes flickered with something, fear maybe, or guilt. But she stepped aside. Come in then. Not that there's much to see. The interior was sparse, a single bed, a table, a hearth, with a blackened pot. No sign of comfort, no sign of company. Geralt's gaze swept the room, sharp and quick. You lost your husband in the war, he said. She nodded once. They left his body in a ditch by the river. I buried him myself. The priest was dead, so I said the words I knew. Geralt's voice was low. And the Nilfgaardian soldier? Marna's hands clenched. He was wounded, starving. I took pity, fed him, gave him a place to sleep. He died not long after. How? She turned away, staring into the hearth. Fever. He had black marks on his chest like burns. I buried him too behind the elm. Geralt's eyes narrowed. Did you touch the body? Or his blood? Her silence was answer enough. He stepped to the door and looked outside. The elm loomed tall and crooked, its roots twisting through the damp soil. Beneath it, a patch of earth was freshly turned. Geralt knelt there and ran a gloved hand through the dirt. It was cold and wrong. A faint trace of magic lingered, bitter and metallic, like the taste of coins on the tongue. He muttered under his breath, drawing the sign of Yrden in the air. The rune shimmered faintly, and for an instant, the ground seemed to shudder. Something beneath it shifted, almost like breathing. Marna gasped behind him. What is that? Geralt rose slowly, brushing the dirt from his gloves. Cursed ground. The soldier brought something with him, something that feeds on sorrow. When you buried him, it rooted here. She backed away, hand to her mouth. Then what of me? I dream of blood, of faces I know screaming. And when I wake, her voice broke. There's dirt under my nails. Geralt looked at her, his expression grim. It's feeding through you. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, please. He reached into his satchel, pulling out a vial of clear oil. There may be a way to sever it, but I'll need the corpse. And I'll need to see what's left of it before sunset. That night, the villagers gathered again, fearful and silent, watching as Geralt worked by the elm, with torchlight flickering around him. He had drawn a wide circle of salt and placed the soldier's remains within it, blackened bones, half consumed by the roots. The air was thick, heavy, humming with tension. Geralt poured the oil onto the bones and whispered an incantation in elder speech. The circle glowed faintly. For a moment there was only silence. Then the ground split open. A shriek tore through the night, high and furious, and a shape burst from the soil, tall, lean, and crimson-eyed. Its skin was stretched tight over bone, its mouth a ruin of fangs. Blood dripped from its claws, hissing where it struck the circle's edge. The villagers screamed. Marna fell to her knees, clutching her head. Geralt's silver sword sang as it left its scabbard. "Amar," he said under his breath, "no ordinary curse." The creature lunged, slamming against the invisible barrier of the circle. Sparks flew. It shrieked again, the sound cutting into the bones of everyone present. Geralt moved like a shadow, stepping forward, signs flashing from his hands. Yrden, Quen, Igni. The runes flared, weaving a cage of light, but the creature's strength was immense. It smashed through the circle, scattering salt and dirt, its eyes burning with hatred. Geralt met it head-on, steel against claw, flesh against fang, the air filled with sparks and the stench of blood. When at last the creature fell back, howling, it turned toward Marna, and she screamed, the same red fire now burning in her eyes. The Witcher froze for a heartbeat, realization cutting cold through his veins. The mar had not been bound to the soldier's bones. It was bound to her. The cry that left Marna's throat was not human. It tore through the night like the wail of some lost ancient thing, echoing against the hills and scattering the crows that slept in the trees. Her body arched, her limbs twisting in unnatural angles, and then she fell forward, on all fours, trembling, panting, her nails clawing deep furrows into the dirt. The villagers fled in terror. Only Geralt remained where he stood, his sword raised, his eyes locked upon her. The light of the torches flickered over her face, half woman, half something else. Her skin had turned a sickly gray, veins dark as ink running beneath it. Her mouth bled as her teeth lengthened, and the crimson glow of her pupils burned with the same hunger as the creature that had risen from the earth. The Mars spirit had found its vessel. Geralt's voice came low and even, though his every muscle tensed for the fight. "Marna, can you hear me?" Her head snapped toward him, and for a moment, only a moment, he saw her eyes soften, a glimmer of recognition amid the madness. But then it was gone, smothered beneath the crimson fire that consumed her. "Geralt," she hissed, her voice layered with two tones, hers and something deeper, ancient, echoing. "He called to me. He said he was lonely. You would not understand what it is to lose everything." Her words twisted into laughter, cruel and sharp. Then she lunged. Geralt rolled aside, her claws grazing his shoulder, cutting through leather and skin alike. He countered with a quick slice of silver, but she moved fast, faster than any normal foe. She struck again and again, and each time he barely turned her aside. Around them the village burned. The torches had fallen, setting the dry fences alight. The night was alive with flame and shadow. Geralt ducked beneath another blow and raised his hand, shouting a sign. Ard, a shockwave that flung her back into the mud. She skidded, shrieking, smoke rising from where the Witcher's blade had grazed her. "Stay down," he warned, circling her carefully. "It's not too late to end this cleanly." Her laughter came again, hollow and trembling. "End this? Witcher, you can't end what's already dead." Her form blurred, then split. Two figures moved where there had been one, a perfect reflection, each mirroring the other's steps. Illusion. Geralt swore under his breath. The Mar had taken full control. He reached into his satchel, pulling free a small glass vial filled with shimmering liquid. vampire oil laced with the dust of moonroot. He poured it across the edge of his silver sword and murmured the words of the sign Yrden once more. The circle flared, faint but steady, casting violet light across the ground. The two Marnas lunged from opposite sides. Geralt turned, swung once, felt the blade connect with something solid, and heard one of them scream. The illusion flickered, dissolved into mist. The real Marna fell, clutching her side. Blood, dark and thick, oozed between her fingers. But instead of falling still, she smiled through the pain, showing teeth far too sharp. "You can't kill me," she whispered. "You'd have to kill her too." Geralt frowned. "Her?" From the shadows of the tree line came another sound, slow, deliberate footsteps. The villagers, watching from afar, gasped. A second figure emerged from the mist. It was the Nilfgaardian soldier, or what was left of him. His flesh hung in tatters, his eyes two pits of red light, the Mars echo, the remnant of the curse that had taken root in both its victims. Together they had become a single, twisted being. "Ah," Geralt muttered, double-bound. The soldier, no, the wraith in his form, spoke in a voice that rasped like torn leather. "She fed me with pity. Now I feed through her. One cannot die while the other lives." Marna laughed again, the sound fevered and hollow. "Do you see, Witcher? We are one, lovers in death." Geralt circled slowly, measuring the distance between them. The fire crackled behind him, the heat licking his back. His options were narrowing. "Then I'll just have to kill you both at once," he said quietly. They came for him together. One from the left, one from the right. Geralt moved with lethal grace, his sword flashing silver arcs through the dark. He deflected the soldier's claws, spun, drove a boot into Marna's chest, and flung her back. The soldier's jaws snapped inches from his throat, but the Witcher ducked low and drove his blade upward into its chest. The creature howled, thrashing. Its body burst into ash and smoke, but even as it fell, Marna screamed, clutching her heart as if pierced herself. Geralt froze. Killing one was killing the other. He swore again bitterly and kicked the remains aside. Marna slumped to the ground, her breath ragged. The firelight painted her face in shades of red and gold, her monstrous features fading for a moment back into human ones. "Make it stop," she whispered. "Please. Make it stop." Geralt's sword wavered in his hand. He could feel the weight of her plea, heavy and human. But the signs were clear. The curse had sunk too deep. "There's no saving you now," he said softly. "But I can make it quick." Tears streamed down her cheeks, though her eyes no longer looked at him. They were fixed somewhere beyond, seeing her husband, her son, her lost life. "Thank you," she breathed. Geralt stepped forward. One clean motion, silver, through the heart. Her body shuddered once, then went still. The wind shifted. The smell of blood lingered, but the air lightened. The oppressive weight lifting from the village as the curse broke. The fires died down, leaving only smoldering ash. Geralt wiped his blade on his cloak, sheathed it, and stood for a long while over the fallen woman. The dawn was breaking again, gray and cold and merciless. When he turned, Elder Bram was there, hat clutched in both hands, face pale as chalk. "Is it over?" Geralt nodded once. "For now." The elder swallowed. "The others, they'll want to know what to do with her body." "Burn it," Geralt said simply, "and scatter the ashes beyond the fields. Don't bury her here again. This soil's had enough of the dead." Bram nodded, his lips trembling. "Aye, And you, Witcher? Will you stay? Geralt's gaze wandered to the horizon, where the morning sun crawled up behind the mist. No, he said. There'll be others who need me. He walked back to Roach, waiting at the edge of the path, and mounted without another word. The villagers watched in silence as he rode away, the fog swallowing him by degrees until he was gone. Nothing left but hoof prints in the wet earth. Behind him, the flames rose one last time as Marna's body turned to ash. And somewhere far beyond Brinna, the path stretched onward, long, lonely, and forever bathed in blood. The road north wound through the marshlands like a pale scar, glistening faintly beneath the morning sun. The fog had lifted, though its memory still clung to the air, thick with the scent of decay and wet reeds. Geralt rode in silence, the rhythm of Roach's hooves steady and soft. Behind him, Brinna faded into the distance, a small, smoke-stained blotch on the horizon. He had not slept since the fight. Sleep came hard after curses like that, and harder still when one's conscience offered no peace. He could still see Marna's face as he struck the final blow, that last flicker of gratitude, or perhaps relief, before the curse claimed her for good. The Witcher reached into his saddlebag and drew out a small pouch. Inside, he could feel the faint pulse of what remained of the Mars essence, black dust sealed in a glass vial. He would deliver it to Oxenfurt, to a mage he trusted. Perhaps, he thought grimly, it might tell him something useful before the next contract turned him into another man's nightmare. A crow's caw drew his attention. It circled above a patch of marsh ahead, crying sharply, its wings slicing through the air like blades. Crows rarely lingered alone. Geralt slowed Roach's pace. The bird's flight path curved lower and lower until it vanished behind a copse of willows. He dismounted, drew his silver sword, and approached. The marsh gurgled beneath his boots, mud sucking at his heels. When he reached the spot, he saw the reason for the crow's agitation, a corpse, half sunken in the muck. The man was dressed in armor, light mail dented and blackened by fire. A Temerian soldier, by the looks of it. His throat had been slit from ear to ear, and his fingers still clutched a rusted dagger. Not far away, the grass was trampled, and the remnants of a campfire smoked faintly. Geralt crouched beside the body, frowning. No beast, he murmured. Human work. He searched the corpse with quick, efficient movements. A small satchel, waterlogged but intact, yielded a handful of coins, a scrap of parchment, and something that made the Witcher's brows draw together, a small pendant in the shape of a burning sun. Nilfgaardian. He turned the pendant over in his palm. The edges were worn as though the man had rubbed it often, a soldier's talisman perhaps. But what was a Nilfgaardian trinket doing around a Temerian's neck? The answer came not in words but in sound, the faint crunch of footsteps behind him. "Step out," Geralt said evenly, not turning. Slowly, a figure emerged from the trees, a young man in a battered cuirass, carrying a spear that trembled in his hands. His face was thin, eyes hollow from sleeplessness and fear. You're one of them?" the boy asked. Geralt rose, sheathing his sword, but keeping his stance wary. "One of who?" "The Witcher." "That's right." The boy swallowed hard. "Then maybe you can help." "The patrols, our patrols, they've gone missing. 2 squads gone without a trace. We found what was left of the last one this morning. Just bones and torn armor." Geralt studied him for a long moment. "Where?" "Half a league east, Near the old mill. The captain's offering coin for anyone who finds out what's happening. Geralt glanced once more at the dead soldier. The wound was clean, deliberate, not a monster's mark. Yet if patrols were vanishing, something else was at work. Perhaps not claws this time, but daggers and fear. "Take me there," he said. The boy nodded, relief flickering briefly in his eyes. Together they set off through the marsh, the air thick with insects and the croak of unseen frogs. The old mill came into view an hour later, a sagging ruin by the riverbank, its wheel long rotted away. A handful of soldiers were gathered nearby, tense and pale, their armor dulled by mud and sleepless nights. Their captain, a grizzled man with a scar running down one cheek, eyed Geralt warily as they approached. "And who in all the gods' names are you?" "Geralt of Rivia. Heard you've lost men?" The captain grunted. "We've lost more than men. We've lost the gods' mercy, I'd say." He gestured toward a patch of ground beyond the mill. "Found them there, or what was left. See for yourself." Geralt stepped closer. The stench hit him first, a sour, sickly odor that clung to the back of the throat. The remains were scattered across the reeds, bones gnawed clean, armor twisted and blackened as if scorched. He knelt, brushing mud away from a skull. The edges of the bone were marked, not by teeth, but by something sharper, finer. He drew in a slow breath. "Not a beast," he said at last. "Something human, or close to it." The captain spat. "Bandits, then?" "No, bandits don't burn their prey." Geralt pointed at the armor. "Whatever did this used fire, but not from a torch. It's too precise." One of the soldiers crossed himself. "Sorcery," he whispered. Geralt didn't answer. He stood and scanned the trees. The air felt wrong, thick with the residue of magic, and beneath it something else, a scent like sulfur and ash. He turned to the captain. "Your men, did they capture anyone recently?" The captain's jaw tightened. "A Nilfgaardian spy. We hanged him 3 nights ago." "Why?" Geralt's gaze returned to the burned bones. "Because you didn't just hang him. You cursed this ground when you did." The men muttered uneasily. The captain's face darkened. "You mean he did this? From the grave?" Geralt nodded once. "Or something came for him. A fire-born revenant, maybe. A botchling twisted by hatred and flame. If that's the case, it won't stop with soldiers. It'll burn everything that breathes." The captain's voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. "What do we do?" Geralt unsheathed his silver sword. The blade gleamed faintly in the dim light. "You dig up his body. I'll do the rest." By dusk, they had found the grave, a shallow pit beneath the mill, the body barely covered. The noose still hung around the corpse's neck, blackened and stiff. Geralt crouched beside it, murmuring the words of a purification rite older than any temple's prayer. The air thickened, trembling like heat haze. Then the corpse's eyes flared open, burning red. "Stand back," Geralt said. The soldiers stumbled away as the corpse rose, smoke pouring from its mouth, its skin cracking like burning parchment. It screamed, a sound of rage, betrayal, and endless fire, and lunged. Geralt met it head on. The first blow shook the ground, sparks flying where silver met infernal flame. He rolled aside, striking again faster, aiming for the spine. The revenant clawed at him, its touch searing through his coat. The Witcher bared his teeth. "You wanted vengeance," he growled. "Then take it in peace." He drew a vial from his belt, shattered it across his blade, and the silver flared, white hot. The next strike cleaved through the revenant's chest. A blinding flash followed, Fire, light, and silence. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but ash and a half-melted noose. Geralt sheathed his sword and turned toward the men who watched in awed silence. "It's over," he said. "Burn the ashes. Say no prayers." The captain nodded slowly. "Aye, and you, Witcher, your coins well earned." Geralt mounted Roach as the soldiers began their grim work. He did not wait for payment. The path called, and the world beyond the marsh still needed cleansing. As night fell, the first stars emerged, cold and distant, glimmering faintly over the smoke and ruin, and once more the Witcher rode toward them, silent and solitary, carrying with him the scent of blood, fire, and destiny. The moon rose high above the marshes, pale and hollow, spilling its light across the endless reeds and stagnant pools. The fire-born revenant was gone, reduced to ash and smoke, yet the night refused to settle. The wind carried whispers through the grass, low, mournful sounds that had nothing to do with weather. Roach's ears flicked back uneasily as she moved, and even Geralt could feel it. That cold, subtle weight that lingers when death has been disturbed too often. He had not gone far before the scent reached him, blood, old and bitter, hidden beneath the damp. He halted Roach and listened. Far off, an owl hooted. Water dripped from the branches overhead, but beneath it all was another sound. Soft footsteps, deliberate, keeping pace with his horse. Geralt's hand went to his sword. "You can stop hiding," he said quietly. A figure emerged from the shadows of the willows, a woman cloaked in black, her face hidden beneath a hood. She moved with quiet grace, her boots barely disturbing the mud. "Geralt of Rivia," she said, her voice calm, smooth as riverstone. He narrowed his eyes. "Who's asking?" She drew back her hood, revealing sharp features framed by dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. "My name is Isadora. I serve the sorceress Margarita L'Antille. She sent me to find you." Geralt's brows lifted slightly. "Margarita? I haven't heard that name since Aretuza. What does she want with me?" Isadora's gaze lingered on him. "There are rumors spreading through the north. Villages burning without cause, men dying in their sleep, their hearts turned to ash. She believes it's connected to something ancient, something that's waking." He studied her face, "And she thinks I'm fool enough to go looking for it." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "You've looked for worse." Geralt said nothing. The wind hissed through the reeds, carrying the faint sound of water lapping against stone. Finally, he dismounted. "All right, speak." Isadora's expression hardened. Margarita traced the source to a ruined fortress called Hesselgard, deep in the forests west of here. Once it belonged to a Nilfgaardian battle mage, a man named Renfarn. He was executed during the First War for forbidden practices. The records claim he burned himself alive before they could take him. But something still stirs in the ruins. Geralt frowned. "You think Renfarn's spirit is behind this?" "I think," Isadora said, her tone even, "that whatever he was trying to summon didn't die with him." The Witcher exhaled slowly, watching his breath turn to mist. "Hesselgard," he muttered. "That's a cursed place if ever there was one." Isadora nodded. "And cursed places are what you do best." He gave a humorless half-smile. "You're not wrong." They rode together beneath the moonlight, the marshes giving way to forest, tall pines whispering overhead, their shadows long and restless. As they traveled, Isadora spoke little, but Geralt caught her watching him. From time to time, her expression unreadable. At last they reached a clearing. The ruins of Hesselgard loomed ahead, great black stones thrust from the earth like broken teeth. The fortress walls were half collapsed, the towers leaning, their tops lost in mist. Strange symbols glimmered faintly upon the stones, visible only when the moonlight struck them. Geralt dismounted and drew his sword, feeling the prickle of magic in the air. This place stinks of sorcery. Isadora dismounted as well, clutching a small silver amulet around her neck. Margarita warned me the same. The air's thick with residue. Be cautious. They crossed the threshold of the ruin. The gates hung open, rusted and warped. Inside the courtyard lay in ruin, fallen stones, blackened trees, and the faint shimmer of old spells. A chill deeper than night settled around them. "Stay close," Geralt said. They passed through what had once been a hall. The floor was cracked, filled with stagnant water that reflected the ceiling's broken vaults. At the far end stood a door of iron, half melted, its surface marked by burn scars. Geralt touched it lightly. His fingers came away warm. "It's active," he said. Before he could speak further, the door shuddered and swung open with a groan. A gust of heat poured out, smelling of ash and blood. Beyond lay a stair spiraling downward into darkness. Isadora drew a small orb from her pouch. With a whispered word, it flared to life, casting pale light through the stairwell. Together they descended. The air grew hotter with each step. The stones beneath their boots glowed faintly red, pulsing as if alive. And then they reached it, a vast underground chamber, its walls inscribed with runes that crawled like living things. At its center stood an altar of obsidian. Upon it, a corpse sat upright, blackened, twisted, eyes still open. Geralt approached slowly, sword drawn. "Renfarn," he murmured. The air trembled. The corpse moved. Its head turned toward him with a sound like cracking bone. The voice that came was dry as smoke. "You're late, Witcher," Isadora gasped, raising her amulet, but Geralt motioned her back. "You should have stayed dead," he said. Renfarn's ruined lips twisted into something like a smile. "Death is a gift, given to the unworthy. I have been chosen to return. The fire within me burns eternal." The runes along the walls flared, and from the shadows emerged shapes, humanoid but formless, their outlines flickering like flame, specters born of burnt souls. Geralt took his stance. "Flame wraiths," he muttered. "Wonderful." The first one lunged. He met it with a strike of silver, slicing through its chest. It burst apart in a shower of embers, but 3 more came in its place. Isadora chanted under her breath, casting a barrier of light that held the wraiths at bay. Though her strength faltered with each blow, Geralt fought like a storm, his blade flashing, signs bursting in blue and gold. Ard shattered one, Igni consumed another in its own fire. Still they came, endless, screaming in tongues lost to time. Finally, he drove his sword through Renfarn's chest. The corpse convulsed, laughter echoing through the chamber. "You cannot kill fire with steel, Witcher. You can only feed it." Geralt snarled and wrenched the blade free. "Then let's see if it chokes on ash." He seized a rune stone from his belt, pressed it to the altar, and shouted a word of power. The chamber erupted in light. The runes screamed, the specters dissolved, and Renfarn's body burst into flame that devoured even its own shadow. When the light faded, silence fell. Geralt leaned on his sword, breathing hard. Isadora stood at his side, pale and trembling, her orb guttering. "Is it done?" she whispered. He looked down at the smoldering remains. For now. Above them thunder rumbled, distant, heavy, as if the very sky marked the passing of something that should never have lived. Geralt sheathed his sword and looked to Isadora. Tell Margarita she was right, something stirring, and this was only a whisper of it. Isadora met his gaze, fear in her eyes. Then what comes next? He turned toward the stairway, his voice low, hard as steel. The real fire. They left the ruin behind, the wind rising as the night deepened. Somewhere far to the east, a red glow began to stain the horizon, and Geralt of Rivia, Witcher of the Path, rode once more into the darkness, where destiny waited, cloaked in flame. Dawn came gray and bitter, dragging the mists over the treetops like a shroud. The ruins of Hesselgard lay far behind them, smoldering faintly in the distance, but the air still carried the scent of burned stone and scorched flesh. Geralt rode in silence, his face expressionless, though his thoughts ran dark and deep. Isadora rode beside him, her cloak drawn tight against the chill. Neither spoke for a long while. When the silence finally broke, it was her voice that did it. "You killed him," she said quietly, "or what was left of him." Geralt didn't look at her. He was already dead. What I killed was the thing that refused to stay that way. Isadora's gaze flicked to him. "You make it sound simple." "Simple doesn't mean easy." They rode on through the thickening fog. The forest gave way to rolling hills, dotted with the charred skeletons of houses long abandoned. Here and there, smoke curled from the chimneys of the few still inhabited dwellings, the scent of peat and despair mixing in the cold morning air. "Do you think it's spreading?" she asked at last. He nodded. Whatever woke Renfarn wasn't his doing. He was just the first to feel it. "Then what was it?" Geralt's jaw tightened. "Something old. Older than the wars. Older than magic, maybe. I felt it before, once near Shintra. The ground itself trembled for days after the wild hunt passed overhead." Isadora frowned. "The wild hunt? You think this is their work?" He shook his head. "No, but it smells the same, like frost and fire at once, like something that shouldn't exist." She said nothing after that. The road stretched ahead, winding through a valley where the air grew colder still. Snow began to fall, thin flakes at first melting on their cloaks, then thicker, until the land was swallowed in white. The trees creaked beneath the weight of it, and the world grew quiet except for the crunch of hooves and the soft hiss of falling snow. By midday they reached a small hamlet perched at the foot of a frozen lake, its name painted in flaking white letters on a wooden post read Torson's Crossing. Smoke rose from the chimneys and the smell of roasting meat drifted through the air. For the first time in days, Geralt saw people who didn't look afraid of their own shadows. The inn stood at the center of the square, a sturdy stone building with frost-coated windows and a faded sign that bore the image of a boar. They dismounted and stepped inside, the warmth of the hearth washing over them like a tide. The innkeeper, a broad man with a beard like a snowdrift, gave them a wary glance before nodding. "Travelers, you'll want ale and a place by the fire, then? Cold out there." Geralt tossed a coin on the counter. "And information." The man's eyes darted to the medallion around Geralt's neck. "Ah, Witcher, then. There's always something needing killing, I suppose. You'll find no monsters here, though, only fishermen and drunks." "Drunks talk," Geralt said. The innkeeper chuckled. "Aye, that we do." They took seats near the fire, and soon 2 mugs of ale and a loaf of bread arrived. The warmth seeped into their bones, though the Witcher's thoughts stayed cold. Around them, the murmur of conversation rose and fell, the sound of ordinary folk pretending not to notice death creeping ever closer to their doorsteps. A few minutes later, an old man hobbled over, leaning heavily on a cane. "Pardon me," he said, his voice quavering, "but I couldn't help overhearing. You're the Witcher, aren't you? From Rivia?" Geralt nodded. "That's right." The old man licked his lips nervously. "Then maybe you can tell me what it was I saw on the lake last night. Thought my eyes were playing tricks. But it weren't no trick." Geralt's expression sharpened. "What did you see?" "A light," the man whispered, "red as blood, dancing on the water, moved too quick to be fire, too heavy to be will-o-wisps. And then..." He hesitated, his knuckles whitening around his cane. "Then I heard a cry, a woman's voice. Sounded like she was calling for help. Then the light sank and the ice cracked. The room had gone quiet. Even the innkeeper stopped wiping his mugs." Geralt leaned back slowly. "How long ago?" "Last night, Witcher. Just after moonrise." He nodded once. "You did right to tell me." Isadora glanced at him. "You think it's connected?" "Everything's connected," he said, "especially when it reeks of death." By dusk, they were standing at the edge of the frozen lake. The snow had stopped, but the air was sharp enough to bite through cloth and skin alike. The ice stretched far into the distance, a sheet of glass veined with cracks. In the fading light, it gleamed faintly red, as if something deep beneath it glowed like a dying coal. Geralt crouched, touching the surface with a gloved hand. The medallion at his neck trembled faintly. "Magic," he said, "old and twisted." Isadora's breath clouded in the air. "Can you sense what kind?" He shook his head. "Something buried. Something waiting." They stepped carefully onto the ice, each movement deliberate. The sound of it, groaning beneath their weight, echoed like distant thunder. Halfway across, Geralt stopped. There, beneath the frozen surface, a shape moved. "Do you see that?" Isadora whispered. He nodded. The shape rose slowly, a pale skeletal figure, its arms outstretched, its face hidden in a shroud of frost. For a moment, it seemed to float just beneath the ice, staring up at them with hollow eyes. Then the ice cracked. The lake erupted. A burst of freezing mist swallowed them whole, and from it emerged the creature, a wraith of ice and sorrow, its voice like a winter gale. Geralt was thrown back, his boots skidding across the slick surface. Isadora cried out, raising her amulet, its light flaring against the storm. "Back!" Geralt shouted, drawing his sword. The silver gleamed, bright as moonlight. The wraith lunged. He rolled aside, the blade cutting through its form, scattering shards of frost that burned where they touched. Isadora whispered a spell, and a ring of fire bloomed around her, steam hissing as it met the frozen air. "It's a lady of the lake," she gasped. "Bound spirit, mourning, vengeful." Geralt gritted his teeth. "Then let's give her peace." He drove forward, his movements swift and sure, each strike a burst of silver and flame. The wraith shrieked, its form unraveling in ribbons of light. For a heartbeat, he saw her face, a woman's, beautiful once, now carved with grief. "I waited," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He never came home." Geralt lowered his blade. "Then go to him." He struck once more, clean and final. The light flared, then faded. Silence returned, deep and still. When they reached the shore again, the wind had died. The red glow beneath the ice was gone. Isadora looked out across the frozen expanse. You freed her, she said softly. Geralt shook his head. No, just another ghost laid to rest. The world's full of them. He turned toward the dark line of the trees. Come on, the path doesn't end here. And as they walked into the gathering night, the first flakes of new snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering the footprints they left behind. The following day dawned still and silver, the snow covering the land like a burial shroud. Geralt and Isadora had left the frozen lake far behind, but the air still felt wrong, too heavy, too watchful. It was the kind of silence that lingered after death, as though the world itself held its breath. They rode north along a winding trail that cut through the hills. The trees stood close together, their trunks black against the snow, and ravens followed their path, cawing from branch to branch. Roach's breath steamed in the cold. Isadora's horse, a gray mare named Selwyn, snorted and tossed its head uneasy. Geralt scanned the tree line. They're following us. I know, she replied quietly. They've been following since the lake. Specters? She shook her head. No, something else. Watching, but not moving closer. He didn't press. He'd felt it too. The prickle at the back of his neck, the faint rustle of movement that was never quite there when he turned. It wasn't the dead that haunted their steps this time, but the living. By midday they reached a narrow valley where the snow gave way to frozen mud. A stream cut through its center, half-iced and glimmering faintly in the pale light. Ahead, smoke rose from a small settlement crouched at the base of the cliffs. Looks like we found shelter, Isadora murmured. Geralt's expression remained guarded, or something pretending to offer it. The village was small, no more than a dozen huts, a forge, and a tavern that leaned dangerously to one side. A wooden palisade circled the outskirts, its gates hanging open. The people who moved about inside looked thin and wary, their faces pale beneath layers of wool and grime. An old man at the gate lifted a trembling hand in greeting. Travelers, are you? Come for the fair? Geralt frowned. Fair? Aye, the man said, his eyes bright with the feverish light of someone clutching to hope. The winter's fair happens every year. We offer the first of our stock to the fire, and the spirit blesses us with a mild season. Isadora glanced at him sharply. A spirit? The old man nodded eagerly. Aye, comes down from the cliffs each year, right at dusk. Takes the offerings, leaves us peace. Geralt's tone turned cold. And if you don't offer? The man's smile faltered. Then the snows don't stop, and people go missing come nightfall. The Witcher and the sorceress exchanged a look. Inside the tavern, the warmth of the fire barely touched the air. The villagers spoke in hushed voices, their eyes darting toward the window, where the mountains loomed like gray sentinels. Geralt sat with his back to the wall, listening. Every tale was the same, of a spirit with a woman's face and eyes like fire, descending from the heights to claim her due. When night fell, the fair began. The villagers gathered around a great bonfire in the square, their breath rising in white clouds. Offerings were laid out, grain, bread, dried herbs, and, to Geralt's disgust, a lamb bound at the feet. Drums began to beat, a dull, heavy rhythm that echoed through the cold. The fire leapt higher. Then the wind changed. It came down from the cliffs with a sound like a sigh, carrying flakes of glowing ash. The people fell silent, bowing their heads. Isadora's hand tightened on her staff. Geralt's medallion began to vibrate, and then she appeared. At first, she looked human, a tall woman draped in rags of white, her hair pale as snow, her face hauntingly beautiful, but her eyes burned red and her feet left no prints in the snow. She walked straight into the fire, the flames bending toward her like servants. "The spirit of winter," someone whispered. "Our Lady." Geralt rose slowly, hand on the hilt of his sword. No spirit. A higher vampire, Fletera type, feeding on warmth, not blood. The creature's gaze shifted to him. Her lips parted, revealing teeth far too sharp. "Witcher," she said, her voice soft and terrible, "you tread upon my ground." "Your ground?" Geralt said evenly. "Strange. Looks like these people do all the dying." "They offer willingly," she purred. "Their fear is my feast. Their obedience, my peace." Geralt stepped forward, drawing silver. "Then I'll starve you." The vampire moved before the villagers could blink. One moment she stood in the fire, the next she was behind him, her clawed hand reaching for his throat. He spun, slicing upward, steel catching light, and sparks flew. The crowd screamed and scattered. Isadora raised her staff, chanting in the elder's speech. Bolts of blue fire shot through the air, striking the creature's chest. She hissed, recoiling, but recovered quickly, her eyes blazing brighter. "You bring witch fire to my winter," she snarled. Geralt lunged, his blade catching her shoulder. The wound smoked, freezing instantly, but she didn't fall. She struck him with an open palm, sending him skidding across the snow. The ice beneath him cracked, splintering like glass. He pushed himself to his feet, blood trickling from his lip. "Fine," he muttered. "Igni it is." The sign burst from his hand, a stream of flame roaring to life. The vampire shrieked, the fire searing through her illusions, revealing her true form, skin pale as bone, eyes glowing like embers, fangs dripping frost instead of blood. "Now you burn," Geralt said. She leapt again, but this time Isadora was ready. Her magic flared, forming a barrier of light that held the creature fast. "Do it!" she cried. Geralt swung, the silver blade cutting clean through her neck. For a moment, the world froze. Then the body collapsed into ash, scattering on the wind like snow. The villagers watched in silence as the fire dimmed. "Is it over?" the old man whispered. Geralt cleaned his sword, sheathing it. "Aye, no more offerings, no more spirits." The man fell to his knees, weeping. "Then what'll we do? The winter will never end without her blessing." Geralt looked toward the mountains. "You'll live through it the same way everyone does, by surviving." He turned away from the crowd, his breath misting in the cold. Isadora followed, her face pale. "Everywhere we go," she murmured, "we find another horror, another ghost, feeding on despair." Geralt nodded grimly. "Because the world's breaking. The veil between things is thinning. Monsters aren't being born anymore, they're coming back." "From where?" she asked softly. He looked up at the night sky, where the clouds had parted to reveal the red smear of the moon. "From the places we buried them," he said. They rode out before dawn, leaving the village and its frightened souls behind. The snow fell thicker now, and the wind carried a faint whisper that neither of them could name. But Geralt of Rivia felt it deep in his bones. The path ahead was growing darker, and though he did not yet know what waited at its end, he knew one truth with cold certainty. The blood he had spilled in Brinna, in Hesselgard, on the frozen lake, all of it, was only the beginning. The storm came with the dawn, sudden, merciless, howling through the mountains like a living thing. The wind tore at cloaks and branches alike, and the snow fell in blinding sheets. that swallowed the path. Roach and Selwyn trudged on, heads bowed, steam curling from their nostrils. Geralt rode at the front, half hidden by the gale. His cloak was crusted with ice, his white hair whipped against his face. Isadora followed close behind, her staff glowing faintly with protective runes that flickered like dying embers in the storm. They had left the cursed village 2 days ago, but the wind had not stopped since. It came from the north, unnatural, unending, and it carried whispers. Sometimes words, sometimes laughter, sometimes screams that weren't there when you turned to listen. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, they saw it, rising out of the white expanse like a wound in the world. A fortress black as coal perched atop a frozen ridge. Geralt reined in Roach, his breath fogging the air. That, he said, wasn't on any map. Isadora squinted through the snow. I can feel it. The magic is twisted, older than men, older even than Aretuza's records. Something sleeps there. Then we wake it carefully. They climbed the narrow trail that led to the fortress. The walls were jagged, the gate half buried in snow. Strange runes glowed faintly beneath the ice, markings in no language either of them knew. The air itself hummed. Geralt dismounted and pressed a hand to the stone. It was warm. Fire beneath the ice, he murmured. How fitting. Isadora traced one of the runes with her fingertips, and it flared, searing bright. The gate shuddered and groaned, splitting open with a sound like grinding teeth. Warm air rushed out, carrying the faint scent of dust and decay. They stepped inside. The interior was vast and silent, lit only by the faint red glow of the runes along the walls. Frozen tapestries hung stiff with frost, depicting scenes of war and flame, armies burning, sorcerers kneeling before something wreathed in fire and wings. Renfarn's fortress was nothing compared to this, Isadora whispered. This place was built before Nilfgaard, before Temeria, before the conjunction itself. Geralt's eyes narrowed. You think it's elder magic? I think it's worse. They moved through the great hall, their footsteps echoing against the stone. At its far end stood a throne carved of obsidian. Upon it sat a figure, tall, armored in black, its head bowed. Geralt's hand went to his sword. The figure stirred. With a slow, grinding sound, it lifted its head. The helm that covered its face was cracked, revealing a pale mouth and eyes that burned faintly blue. You have come far, Witcher, it said, voice echoing like the wind in a crypt. Seems I've had an invitation I didn't know about, Geralt replied evenly. The creature rose. Its armor clattered as it moved, each step deliberate, heavy. The world burns and freezes by turns, and yet still your kind wander, killing the children of chaos, while the fathers wake beneath the snow. Spare me the riddles, Geralt said. Who are you? The creature's gaze fixed on him. I was once called Alaric, a knight of the first flame, bound to guard the gate of ember when the stars fell and the skies turned to glass. Now I am its prisoner. Isadora's eyes widened. The first flame, that's a myth, a fragment from elder texts, magic born from the heart of the world itself. You're saying it's real? Alaric turned toward her. Real, sorceress, and waking. Each curse you break, each spirit you lay to rest, it stirs it further. The fire of the void feeds on blood, and the Witcher's path leaves plenty behind. Geralt's hand tightened on his hilt. You're saying this is my fault? The knight gave a hollow laugh. All men's fault. Yours merely hastened the end. Before Geralt could answer, the ground shook. The walls groaned, cracks spreading through the ice. A low hum rose from below, growing into a roar. Isadora gasped. The wards are failing. Something's breaking through. Something vast. Alaric turned toward the throne. It is already too late. He drew his sword, a blade of molten metal that hissed in the cold air. Leave now, Witcher. This gate was meant to stay closed. I don't leave gates open, Geralt said grimly. The knight moved with impossible speed, his blade arcing toward the Witcher's chest. Geralt blocked, sparks exploding between them. The impact sent him stumbling back. The ground trembled again, shaking loose icicles that shattered like glass around them. Isadora shouted a spell, and light filled the hall. The runes flared in protest, writhing like serpents. Alaric turned on her, his sword cleaving through her barrier as though it were mist. Geralt struck from the side, cutting deep into the knight's armor. Black flame spilled from the wound instead of blood. You cannot kill what the flame keeps, Alaric roared, swinging again. Then I'll settle for sealing it. Geralt ducked beneath the strike, rolled, and drove his sword through the knight's abdomen. He twisted, wrenching the blade free as Alaric staggered, falling to one knee. Isadora raised her staff high, her voice breaking through the din. By the old names that bind and burn, by stone and snow, I seal this gate. The fortress shuddered. The runes ignited in crimson fire. A great crack split the floor, and from it rose a column of light, white, blinding, searing. Alaric let out a roar that was half fury, half relief. "End it, Witcher!" he bellowed. "Before it remembers me!" Geralt didn't hesitate. His blade flashed once more, severing the knight's head. The body collapsed, armor clattering across the stone. The light swallowed it whole. And then silence. The glow faded. The air cooled. Only the throne remained, black and empty. Isadora sank to her knees, trembling, her strength spent. "It's done," she whispered. "The gate's sealed again." Geralt looked at the spot where Alaric had fallen. All that remained was a scorched mark, still faintly warm beneath his glove. "For now," he said quietly. They left the fortress as the storm began to break. The sun pushed through the clouds, pale but real. Behind them, the gates of black stone closed with a final groan, locking whatever slept beneath back in its tomb. At the ridge, Isadora turned, her face drawn. "How long before it wakes again?" Geralt swung into Roach's saddle. "Long enough if we're lucky, not long enough if we're not." She looked at him. "And what then?" He glanced toward the horizon, where the light touched the mountains like embers waiting to reignite. "Then," he said, "we start killing gods." The wind carried his words away, and the Witcher rode on, the sound of his horse's hooves fading into the snow, toward a world still burning beneath its frozen skin. The thaw began 3 days later, at first only a few drops, slow and hesitant, dripping from the black pines. Then the snow softened, shrinking into slush, and rivers that had lain buried all winter awoke and roared with sudden life. The road turned to mud, the wind grew warmer, and the land smelled of wet bark and old rot. Geralt of Rivia rode through that shifting season with a silence that matched the change, watchful, wary, uncertain whether the melting snow meant reprieve or omen. Isadora kept pace beside him, her hood drawn, her face pale from exhaustion. The storm had broken her strength. Sealing the gate at the black fortress had drained something deep and irreplaceable from her. She had not spoken since they left the mountains. They stopped at a riverside camp that evening where the swollen current had carried dead branches and worse things from upstream. Geralt built a fire that smoked in the damp air and sat sharpening his silver sword. The rhythmic scrape of whetstone on steel was the only sound between them. Finally, Isadora broke the quiet. "He said you were hastening it." Geralt didn't look up. "Alaric, yes." He ran the whetstone once more down the blade, sparks glinting faintly. "Monsters have always been part of the world. I kill one, two more crawl from the dark. Always been that way. Doesn't mean I made them." Isadora's eyes reflected the firelight. "No, but he wasn't talking about monsters. He meant the flame." Geralt sheathed the sword. "Whatever it is, it's sealed now." "For how long?" She pressed softly. He didn't answer. The fire crackled. Somewhere beyond the camp, a nightjar sang, its cry lonely and strange. When dawn came, they followed the river south toward Temeria's border. The path wound through valleys where spring had already begun to stir, the first shoots of green piercing through the thawed earth, the air alive with the drip of melting snow. Yet the peace of it felt fragile, as if the world itself were holding its breath before something vast and terrible. They reached a crossroads by noon. A tattered signpost pointed east toward Maribor, west toward a ruined fort. A merchant's wagon stood overturned at the junction, its wheels shattered, the horses long gone. Geralt dismounted and crouched beside it. The wood was scorched black. He lifted a piece, sniffed, and frowned. "Sulfur," Isadora joined him, her brow creasing. "Magic? Not the kind you use. Alchemical, volatile. Someone set this fire." He found a trail of footprints leading west. Heavy boots, marching in pairs. Soldiers by the look of it. "We'll follow," he said. The tracks led them to the fort by sunset, a lonely shell of stone rising above the moors. Its banner had once borne Temeria's white lilies, but the cloth now hung tattered and red-streaked, the emblem scorched beyond recognition. Inside the gate, corpses lay scattered. Soldiers, both Temerian and Nilfgaardian, cut down side by side. The battle had been swift, brutal, and recent. The air still stank of iron and ash. Isadora covered her mouth. "What happened here?" Geralt knelt beside one of the bodies, examining a black mark burned into its neck. Not steel, not sorcery. This was done by something else. He brushed back the dead man's collar and saw the sigil seared into the flesh. A spiral of flame, the same shape he had seen etched into the walls of Hesselgard. His voice dropped. "The flame's mark." They moved deeper into the fort. The great hall was in ruins, tables overturned, blood smeared across the walls. At its center stood a man still alive, bound to a post, his face pale with fever. He stirred as they approached, eyes fluttering open. Don't let them light it again," he rasped. Geralt crouched beside him. "Who? What happened here?" The man's lips trembled. "They came from the east. Wore armor black as pitch. Said they served the true fire. Burned everyone who refused to kneel." He coughed, blood staining his beard. "They said the flame would cleanse the north, that the Witcher's work had begun it, and only blood would finish it." His voice failed. He slumped forward still. Geralt stood slowly, his jaw tightening. "Cultists," Isadora said. "They're spreading." He nodded grimly. "They've taken Renfarn's fire and turned it into a creed, and they're using my name to justify it." Before she could answer, a voice echoed through the hall. "So you've finally come." They turned. A figure stepped from the shadows at the far end of the room. A woman clad in blackened mail, her hair cropped short, her eyes like molten gold. She carried no sword, only a staff capped with a burning crystal. The heat it gave off rippled through the air. Geralt recognized her before she spoke again. "Verena," she smiled faintly. "So you remember me, Witcher? I should hope so after the bridge at Dol Angra. That was years ago," he said. "You were with the mages then?" "I was a fool then," she said, her tone cold, "trying to mend a broken world with reason and restraint. But reason died with the last king's head on a spike. The world needs cleansing now. Fire, not philosophy." Geralt's voice hardened. "You've joined them." "I lead them," Verena said simply. "The flame spoke to me. It chose me to finish what you started, the purging of monsters. Only now we burn the true beasts, men who no longer deserve this world." She raised her staff, and the crystal flared. The air around her shimmered, twisting. Figures emerged from the heat, warriors clad in black, their eyes burning with fanatic fire. Geralt drew his silver sword. "You always were too fond of sermons." Verena's smile widened. "And you always mistook silence for wisdom." She flicked her hand, and fire leapt from the staff. Geralt rolled aside, the blast searing the floor where he'd stood. The cultists surged forward, blades drawn. He met them head-on, his sword flashing silver arcs that cut through the haze. The clash of steel and the roar of flame filled the hall. Isadora chanted behind him, weaving barriers of ice that hissed and melted under the heat. "She's channeling from the gate," she shouted. "The flame's still alive beneath it." Geralt gritted his teeth, parrying another strike. "Then we'll snuff it out again." He leapt, cutting through the nearest cultist, then drove toward Verena. She met him blow for blow, her staff deflecting his sword with unnatural strength. Each clash sent ripples of fire through the air. "Still fighting for nothing," she hissed, "still playing hero to a dying world. Better than burning it." Their weapons locked. She smiled, whispering something he couldn't hear, and the crystal at her staff's head cracked. Flame exploded outward, swallowing the hall in light. When the fire cleared, Verena was gone. Only ash remained where she had stood. Geralt staggered, smoke curling from his coat. The floor was scorched, the roof half collapsed. Isadora limped toward him, coughing. She vanished through a portal. He sheathed his sword. "Then she's still out there." "Yes," Isadora said softly, "and she's carrying the flame with her." Geralt looked to the west, where the sunset burned crimson across the horizon. "Then that's where we ride." The fire's reflection glowed in his eyes like a promise and a curse. The path stretched onward into blood and smoke, and Geralt knew what waited at its end was no longer just monsters. It was faith. And faith, once kindled, burned hotter than any pyre. The next morning rose blood red, and the air smelled of iron. A low fog clung to the moors, thick enough to muffle even the sound of hoofbeats. Geralt and Isadora rode westward beneath a sky veined with storm clouds, the last of winter dying slow behind them. The hills grew barren, stripped of trees, and the wind carried a strange scent, burnt herbs, incense, and something older beneath, the smell of sacrifice. They found the first sign of the cult before midday. A pyre stood by the roadside, its wood still smoking. Charred remains hung from it, human and unrecognizable, though the spiral of the flame was carved deep into the stake. Ravens perched along the branches, their black wings shining in the pale light. Isadora drew her cloak tighter. "They're spreading faster than I thought possible," Geralt dismounted, crouching beside the pyre. Faith spreads faster than plague. Fear helps it along. He brushed the ashes aside and found something beneath them, a child's toy, half burnt, a wooden horse carved with surprising care, his jaw clenched. They're not just killing soldiers. Zealots never stop with soldiers, Isadora murmured. He rose, eyes scanning the horizon. We'll find her, Verena, before she lights another one of these. The trail led west through the lowlands. They passed abandoned farms, fields stripped bare, wells poisoned. The few villagers they met shut their doors at the sight of them or whispered prayers when Geralt's medallion caught the light. The name Witcher had begun to mean many things in the north, some spoken with gratitude, more with fear. That night they made camp beside a ruined watchtower. The stars hung low and cold, and the fire cast long shadows across the stones. Geralt sat cleaning his blades, the rhythmic scrape of steel, a steady pulse against the quiet. Isadora watched the flames. What will you do when you find her? Geralt didn't look up. Ask questions first. And if she refuses to answer, he set the whetstone aside. Then the world gets a little quieter. Isadora smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. You talk like a man who's tired of killing, yet you keep sharpening the sword. He met her gaze. The path doesn't end when I'm tired. It ends when I do. A gust of wind hissed through the broken tower. Somewhere far off, wolves howled, their cries sharp and lonely across the moor. Geralt listened until the sound faded, then settled against a stone, eyes half closed, but never truly resting. At dawn they found the camp of the flame. It lay in a hollow between the hills, hidden from the road. Dozens of tents formed a rough circle around a black altar, its surface carved with a spiral sigil. Smoke rose from braziers, and the chanting of voices rolled like thunder through the morning air. Geralt and Isadora dismounted, leaving their horses tied among the rocks. The Witcher's senses sharpened, every heartbeat, every flicker of movement cutting through the haze. The cultists moved in rows before the altar, their faces masked by red cloth, their hands slick with ash. At the altar stood Verena. Her black armor gleamed, the staff burning faintly in her grasp. The flame atop it pulsed like a living heart. Geralt drew his sword, silver glinting in the half-light. I thought zealots liked to hide, he said, stepping into the open. The chanting stopped. Dozens of heads turned toward him. Verena smiled. And I thought witchers liked to keep to their graves. Yet here you are. Seems the world won't stay dead without me. She laughed, a clear, bright sound that cut through the smoke. You still think this is about life and death? This is about rebirth. The flame burns away the rot. Don't you see it, Geralt? You've been doing it your whole life. Cleansing. You kill monsters. I kill men who've become worse than monsters. We're not so different. Geralt's eyes hardened. I don't burn villages to prove I'm right. Because you have no faith. She raised her staff, and the air shimmered. The flame on the altar flared, growing taller, brighter. Watch, Witcher. Watch the world begin again. The cultists knelt, chanting louder, their voices merging into one terrible harmony. The ground began to tremble. Fire burst from the cracks, snaking across the earth in glowing lines that formed the spiral sigil around them. Isadora, Geralt barked. She lifted her hands, her voice cutting through the roar. Vaten, ab enave. Blue light erupted from her palms, colliding with the red fire. For a moment, the two forces clashed, cold and heat creation and destruction. Verina's laughter rang through the chaos. "You can't fight faith with spells, girl," Geralt charged. He moved through the fire as if through water, his medallion vibrating wildly. The cultists scattered, some screaming, others flinging themselves into the flames. Verina swung her staff and a jet of fire struck him square in the chest, sending him skidding across the ground. His armor smoked, but he rose again, teeth bared. "You were always stubborn," she hissed. He raised his sword. "And you were always a fool." They met in a clash of light, steel against flame, purpose against madness. Sparks flew with every strike, burning into the snow. Verina's staff caught his blade, twisting it aside, and she drove her knee into his chest. He stumbled, but caught her wrist, wrenching her arm until the crystal cracked. The fire faltered. Isadora saw her chance. She flung her staff to the ground, pressing her palms together. The blue light of her magic flared once more, forming a sigil in the air, a circle of binding older than any temple's tongue. "Geralt," she shouted, "draw her in." He gritted his teeth and lunged, slamming his shoulder into Verina's chest, forcing her backward into the glowing circle. The binding rune ignited, wrapping around her like chains of light. She screamed as the fire turned inward, devouring itself. "End it," Isadora cried. Geralt raised his sword high, the silver gleaming red in the fire's glow. For a heartbeat, he saw her face. Not the zealot sneer, but the woman he'd once known, proud and stubborn, who had argued philosophy over wine and dreamed of a better world. "I'm sorry," he whispered. He struck. The blade drove through her heart, the crystal on her staff shattering with a sound like breaking glass. The flames roared once, then vanished, leaving only smoke and silence. The cultists fled into the hills, their cries fading. Geralt knelt beside the ashes where Verina had fallen. The spiral symbol was burned into the ground, still faintly glowing. Isadora approached, her voice low. "It's over." He shook his head. "No. The flame doesn't die with one priest. She was a spark. There'll be others." She looked toward the horizon where the rising sun turned the smoke to gold. "Then we keep hunting." Geralt stood, his face shadowed beneath the morning light, "until there's nothing left to burn." They mounted their horses once more, leaving the ruined altar behind. The road stretched west, long and empty, lined with the black stumps of trees. Above them the clouds gathered again, heavy and red, like the promise of another war. And as they rode on, the Witcher knew that the path he followed, the path bathed in blood, had only grown darker, and that the fire waiting at its end would burn hotter than any he had faced before. The smoke from the cult's altar trailed after them for a day and a night, a black finger stretching across the horizon. Even after the wind scattered it, Geralt could smell the ash. The taste of burned stone clung to the back of his throat, a reminder that no victory came without something turning to dust. They rode westward into the foothills of Cadwin, where the land rose and the trees thickened, great pines standing like silent witnesses to the ruin below. The air was colder there, cleaner, but the quiet had the same brittle edge that followed every great fire. Isadora said little. Her strength was fading again. The spell she'd used to bind Verina had drawn from her deeper reservoirs, leaving her pale as frost. Yet she did not ask to stop. She rode with the stubborn focus of one who feared what still followed behind. "Rest," Geralt said once, breaking a silence that had lasted hours. She shook her head. "Not yet." The cult will scatter. They'll burn what's left of themselves, and what's left will crawl back to the flame. We can't give them time to gather again." Geralt glanced at her, his golden eyes half hidden beneath his hood. "You think they'll rebuild so quickly?" "I think faith doesn't die with its fire," she answered. "It only changes shape." The Witcher said nothing after that. He knew she was right. They made camp that night beside a frozen creek. The fire crackled low, more for light than warmth. Geralt sat with his back to a tree, repairing a strap on his scabbard, while Isadora leaned close to the flames, her eyes distant. The stars were cold and sharp above them. "Do you believe in destiny?" she asked suddenly. Geralt didn't look up from his work. "I believe in bad luck, and in choices that lead nowhere." "That's not what I asked." He glanced at her. "Destiny's a word people use to make sense of suffering. It's a story told to give meaning to what's meaningless." Her gaze didn't waver. "And yet you walk the path, kill monsters for coin, keep your oaths even when no one watches. That sounds like a kind of faith to me." Geralt gave a humorless snort. "Faiths for priests. I just do what I was made to do." She smiled faintly. "Made by who, though?" He didn't answer. Before dawn, a sound woke him, a low hum, soft but growing. He rose, every sense sharpened. The air shimmered faintly, and the medallion at his neck trembled. "Isadora," he said quietly. She stirred, then sat up, eyes wide. "Magic, it's close." A shape moved beyond the trees, tall, cloaked, carrying a lantern whose light flickered blue instead of gold. Geralt drew his steel sword, stepping forward. "Stop there." The figure obeyed. The lantern lifted, revealing a man's face, old, lined, but not unkind. His robes marked him as a scholar of Banard, though travel had worn them to rags. "Geralt of Rivia," the stranger said, voice cracked with age. "I've walked many leagues to find you." Geralt's grip tightened on his sword. "Then you've wasted your strength. I'm not taking contracts." "This is no contract." The old man smiled wearily. "It's a warning. The flame has reached the circle." Isadora stepped beside Geralt. "The mages? That's impossible. The council forbade any worship." "They forbade words," the man interrupted. "But hunger can't be bound by rules. A few sought to study the fire's nature, to control it. Now it controls them." He looked at Geralt. "They spoke your name, Witcher. Said the white wolf would lead them to the heart of the first flame." Geralt's voice went cold. "And where's that supposed to be?" The old man raised a trembling hand, pointing north. "Beyond Ard Carré, in the Vale of Echoes, the flame burns there again." The Witcher sheathed his sword. "Then we'll find it." The man's eyes were full of pity. "If you do, you'll find more than fire. The thing beneath it is older than men. It waits for blood. Yours may wake it fully." Geralt turned away. "Then let it wake. I'm tired of fighting shadows." They left the old man there by the creek, his lantern flickering faintly as dawn bled across the sky. The journey north took them through lands long abandoned. The snow deepened again, and the rivers turned to glass. Strange lights moved in the woods at night. Wraiths, will-o'-wisps, the lost remnants of wars that had never really ended. Geralt cut them down when they drew near, his blade flashing silver in the dark. On the third night they reached the edge of the vale. It stretched before them like a scar, a great hollow plain surrounded by cliffs. In its center burned a distant light, red and steady, too bright to be campfire, too low to be the sun. "The heart of it," Isadora whispered. Geralt nodded. "Stay behind me." They descended the slope, boots crunching on frost. The air grew warmer with each step until steam rose from the ground. The smell of sulfur thickened. At the valley floor, the fire blazed from a vast pit ringed with stone pillars. Around it knelt a circle of figures in crimson robes. Their voices carried on the wind, chanting in the same broken tongue Geralt had heard at Hesselgard. One of them turned as he approached, lowering his hood. It was a face he recognized, Temerian by birth, once a soldier, now branded with the spiral of the flame. His eyes glowed faintly red. "Witcher," the man said, "you've come at last. The flame foresaw it." Geralt's voice was like a drawn blade. "You're too late. Your priestess is dead." The cultist smiled. "She was never the flame, only its herald. The true fire sleeps beneath us, and your blood is its key." The ground trembled. Cracks spread outward from the pit, glowing from within. The chanting grew faster. Geralt drew his silver sword. Enough. He struck first, cutting through the nearest robed figure. The body fell, burning from within, but two more took its place. The air shimmered, heat rising in waves. The pit roared, a sound like the beating of wings. Isadora raised her staff, shouting an incantation. Light burst from her hands, shattering the pillars. The flame recoiled but did not fade. Instead, it rose higher, forming a shape, a vast figure of fire and smoke, with eyes like suns. Geralt felt the heat sear through his armor, but he didn't retreat. He gripped his sword with both hands and whispered a sign. "Igni," he muttered, the word half a curse, half a prayer. The spell struck the creature's heart. The explosion tore through the valley, shaking the cliffs, filling the air with white fire. When the light died, the pit was gone. Only a field of glass remained, steaming beneath the moon. Geralt lay on his back, chest heaving, the silver sword scorched black in his hand. Isadora knelt beside him, shaking his shoulder. "You're alive," he nodded weakly. "For now." She looked toward the horizon, where the last embers flickered. "Do you think it's over?" Geralt stared at the sky, the stars wheeling cold above them. "No, the flame's patient. It'll burn again." He rose, sheathing his blade, his breath white in the chill air. "Come, the path isn't done with us yet." They climbed from the vale as dawn returned, the world quiet once more. But beneath the earth, far below the frozen plain, something stirred. A whisper of heat, the promise of fire waiting for its next spark. And high above, riding toward the next horizon, the Witcher felt its shadow follow him. Still. The morning after the battle in the vale dawned ghostly and still. Frost smoked along the broken stones, and the air hung heavy with the faint, bitter scent of ash. Geralt stood at the edge of the crater where the flame had burned, staring down into the pit that no longer glowed. The ground was cracked and glassed, veins of molten rock frozen mid-pulse. No bird sang, no wind moved. Even the snow seemed to hold its breath. Isadora sat some distance away, wrapped in her cloak, eyes closed in exhaustion. Her magic had saved them both, but at a price. Her skin was pale as marble, her hands trembling faintly in her lap. Each spell she cast now seemed to carve a little more life from her. Geralt turned from the crater, his face hard, his medallion motionless against his chest. "We're leaving?" I said. She opened her eyes, weary but alert. "Where?" "West," he replied. "To the foothills of the Mahakam. Dwarves there will know if the earth still moves. If the flame's truly gone, we'll see no tremors. If it isn't," he looked toward the distant horizon, "then we'll know soon enough." They rode through a land scarred by fire. Forests stood black and skeletal, rivers boiled to mud. In some valleys they found towns already abandoned, doors swinging, hearths cold, silence heavy as fog. The cult's passage had left the smell of death wherever it went. Once they passed a farm where a pyre still smoked. 3 figures lay at its base, a woman, an old man, and a child, their hands bound with twine. On the post above them, carved into the wood, was the same spiral mark. Isadora turned her face away. "They're still burning the unbelievers." Geralt's jaw tightened. "No, they're burning the world." By dusk, rain began to fall, thin and cold, more like ash than water. It hissed against the armor on Geralt's shoulders and turned the road to black sludge. The Witcher rode in silence, his thoughts a cold storm of their own. He had fought monsters all his life, beasts born of magic, of hunger, of hatred. But this was worse. The flame didn't kill for survival, it killed for belief. They stopped that night beneath the shadow of an old stone bridge. The fire sputtered weakly, barely enough to warm their hands. Isadora huddled close to it, her hair damp, her face pale and drawn. Geralt sat a few paces away, cleaning his swords by rote. "Do you ever wonder," she said quietly, "if this world can still be saved?" He looked at her over the fire. "Saved from what?" "From itself." Geralt didn't answer right away. The flames reflected in his yellow eyes. "It's not my place to save it," he said finally. "I'm no hero. I kill what's in front of me and I move on. That's all." She smiled faintly. "And yet here you are, fighting something you could have walked away from." He didn't respond. The rain deepened into a steady drum, and the night passed without rest. By morning, the path led them into the foothills, jagged ridges that tore through the mist like black teeth. The wind howled between them, sharp and wet. When they reached the first dwarven outpost, the gates stood open and unguarded. Smoke drifted from the chimneys, but no voices called out. Geralt dismounted, his hand on the hilt of his steel sword. "Stay close," he murmured. They passed through the gate and found the first body almost at once. A dwarf lay face down beside a toppled cart, his beard stiff with blood. Another slumped near the smithy, a hammer still clutched in one hand. The forges were cold, the anvils silent. Isadora's voice trembled. "What happened here?" Geralt knelt beside the dead smith. The man's eyes were open, staring upward and glowing faintly red. His throat was blackened, as though something had burned from inside out. "Flame," Geralt said grimly. "But not cultists. This came from beneath." Before Isadora could answer, the ground shuddered. A low rumble rose from the deep tunnels, rolling like thunder through the stones. The air grew hotter. Geralt drew his silver sword. "Get back!" The earth split. A gout of fire burst upward, throwing them both aside. From the fissure crawled a shape, massive, molten, its form half stone, half flesh. A fire elemental, twisted and corrupted by the flame's essence. Its body pulsed with light, its eyes twin furnaces. Geralt rose, sword ready. "Looks like the flame found itself a new host." The creature bellowed, the sound shaking the mountains. It swung a molten arm, smashing through the nearest wall. Sparks and stone flew. Geralt darted in, striking low, but his blade barely cut through the glowing skin. The heat seared his face. "Isadora!" he shouted. She stood behind him, hands raised, blue fire gathering around her fingers. She released it in a torrent. The blast struck the creature's chest, cracking the molten shell. Geralt took the opening, rolling forward, driving his sword deep into the fissure. The elemental screamed, thrashing. The ground erupted again. A second arm burst from the fissure, clawing at the air. The thing was not alone. Back! Geralt grabbed Isidora's wrist, pulling her toward the gate. We can't hold it here. They ran through the outpost as the mountain roared behind them. Buildings collapsed. Flames leapt skyward. At the gate, Geralt turned once more, drawing a small vial from his belt. Dragon's dream oil. He hurled it into the fissure and whispered a word. Igni. The explosion swallowed the outpost in a sphere of blinding light. The shock wave flung them both to the ground. For a long moment there was nothing but the hiss of cooling stone. When the fire faded, half the mountain was gone. The valley below glowed faintly with molten rivers. Isidora struggled to her feet. Did we stop it? Geralt finished. For now. He sheathed his sword, staring at the burning ruin. But the flames everywhere now. Every place it touched, it left a spark. Every death feeds it. Isidora wiped soot from her cheek. Then how do we end it? Geralt's eyes met hers, weary but steady. The same way you end any fire. You smother it, starve it, or drown it. And if it can't be, he looked west toward the distant peaks where the sun burned low. Then we die trying. They stood there for a while, watching the last embers fade against the storm-dark sky. The wind howled through the ruins, scattering ash across the snow. Finally, Geralt turned to the path again, his voice low but certain. Come. The flames still burning somewhere. And the path, he said, mounting Roach once more, doesn't end until it's cold. They rode into the storm, the mountain behind them still smoldering, a scar upon the world and a promise of more to come. For in the depths below, far beyond sight or sound, the earth glowed faintly red again, as though something vast and patient had merely gone to sleep, waiting for breath or blood to wake it once more. The storm broke. At last, the rain came hard, washing the soot from the mountains, turning ash to mud and flame to steam. For 3 days and nights it poured, as though the sky itself sought to cleanse the land of what had been done. Geralt and Isidora pressed on through the downpour, cloaks drawn, eyes half blinded by the endless sheets of gray. When the rain eased, they found themselves upon the high roads of Cadwyn, where the forests thickened again and life dared to show itself. Ravens wheeled above, feasting on the dead that the flood waters had carried from the foothills. Wild flowers had begun to bloom where the fires had passed, fragile things, yellow and white, trembling in the wind. For the first time in many days there was silence not born of dread, but neither of them trusted it. Geralt rode at the front, his shoulders bowed against the cold. Roach's hooves squelched in the mud, the path winding westward into the fog. Isidora followed close behind, her magic flickering faintly around her hands to ward off the chill. Finally she spoke. We've been riding without rest. You haven't slept since the mountain. Geralt grunted. Sleep's a poor defense. Monsters don't wait for morning. Her tone was softer. I'm not speaking of monsters. He didn't answer. He could still see the mountain in his mind, the blast, the light, the shadow that had moved behind the fire just before it died. It had watched him. He was certain of it. When they stopped for the night, they found shelter in a ruined chapel, half buried by vines. The stone walls were cracked, the altar toppled, but a few candles still stood where worshippers long ago had left them. Geralt struck flint, lighting them, and the weak glow filled the space with ghosts. He dropped his pack beside the wall and sat. Old Melitele Shrine, he said quietly. Abandoned before the first war. Can't say I blame them. Faith doesn't last long where blood's spilled. Isadora knelt by one of the candles, brushing dust from the floor. Faith never dies, she murmured. It only changes shape. That's what frightens me most. Geralt leaned his head back against the wall. The cult's broken. Its leader's dead. You said yourself the flame's energy is fading. She turned to him, her eyes catching the candlelight. Magic doesn't fade. It waits, and the flame isn't gone. It's looking for something new to burn. He said nothing. Outside, thunder rolled far off over the hills, a deep, distant growl. When morning came, the mists clung low and silver. They left the chapel and followed the river that ran west through the woods. As the sun rose, the air grew warm again, strangely warm, given the season. Steam curled from the water. Geralt frowned. Feel that? Isadora nodded. The air's alive. They dismounted. The river's current swirled too fast, as though something deep beneath stirred it. When Geralt crouched by the bank, his medallion trembled violently. Something's under us, he said. The ground began to quake. Water burst upward, and from the depths of the river came a roar, not of a beast, but a flame-meeting flood. The current boiled red, and a figure rose from the steam, tall, terrible, cloaked in smoke. It wore no face, only a mask of molten light. Its voice was 100 whispers speaking as one. White Wolf. Geralt stepped forward, silver sword drawn. You're far from your mountain. The being's laughter rippled through the air. I am the mountain, the fire, the faith. Every life that burned in my name feeds me still. You killed my servants, Witcher, but not me. I was never theirs to command. Isadora raised her staff. It's not a god, she hissed. It's an elemental consciousness, born of belief, bound to fire. If it consumes the river, it'll spread to everything. Geralt finished. Forest, city, all of it. The flame's voice deepened, shaking the trees. You cannot kill me with silver or steel. You cannot burn what is already fire. Geralt's tone was calm. Good thing I brought water. He pulled a vial from his belt, a clear glass filled with faintly glowing liquid. Ard and dimeridium dust, he muttered. Let's see how faith handles physics. He hurled the vial into the heart of the flame and shouted, Ard! The blast of kinetic force met the potion's alchemical surge. The river exploded in steam and light. The shockwave flung both Witcher and sorceress to the ground. When the mist cleared, the thing of flame screamed, not in rage, but in confusion, its body dimmed, its edges fading. Now, Isadora, Geralt shouted. She rose, both hands raised, chanting words older than the conjunction itself. Blue fire spilled from her palms, striking the creature, binding it in rings of cold light. The river roared higher, water swallowing flame, until at last, with a final, echoing cry, the thing collapsed inward and vanished. The water stilled, the air cooled. Only ripples remained. Geralt stood panting, the hilt of his sword still warm in his grip. He turned to Isadora, only to see her faltering, her body trembling violently. Isadora, he said, stepping forward. She smiled faintly, blood on her lips. It's done. But the spell, it takes what it binds. He caught her before she fell. Her eyes met his, pale and fading. Promise me something, she whispered. Anything. If it wakes again, don't fight it alone. Her breath shuddered once, then stopped. The light in her eyes went out like the last spark of a dying ember. Geralt sat there for a long time, the river murmuring beside him. When he finally moved, he laid her on the bank and covered her with his cloak. Travel easy, he said softly. You've earned it. He stood staring west. The clouds were breaking, sunlight piercing through them in long, golden spears. Somewhere beyond the hills, a hawk cried. The Witcher mounted Roach, his eyes on the horizon. Come on, girl, he murmured. No rest for either of us. They rode until the sun dipped low and the land turned red beneath it. Behind him the river glimmered in the light, peaceful once more. But far off, where the mountains met the clouds, a faint line of smoke rose against the sky, thin, distant, persistent. Geralt did not look back. He knew what it meant. The flame never truly died. It only waited for a wind to feed it. And so the Witcher rode on along the endless path, his shadow long across the dying light. One man against the fire of gods, bound to a world that could not stop burning.